Let's paint a scenario that I think is very common. You go to the theater to see the latest blockbuster, there's all this hype and marketing and a movie tie-in with 7-Eleven, and you get there, and you sit down in that bendy chair, and you just feel trapped. And it's not so much that the movie is bad, I mean it might be bad. The director is not making a film that is reflective of your interests or what you want out of film as art. It's just, there's something wrong. So you, in this grandiose declaration, say, I can make a better film than that. Now, it's not accurate. It's just not. It's very difficult to make a film. It requires a lot of technical know-how. It's just hyperbole. You know, it's like, oh, you're a professional, but I could make a better film than that. The point is that we have all had that feeling. And it doesn't necessarily have to be about film. It could be about anything. You know, like, I could make a better blank than that. Well, that's what the French New Wave was. It was a group of French film critics who were tired of what they were seeing at the theater in their country and decided to make their own movies. I could do better than that, they probably all said, likely in French. French film post-World War II, according to these critics, did not give France a kind of national identity or tackle modern social feelings and, you know, ennui that was happening in that country at the time. That's not to say that there weren't great French films in the 50s and 60s. Jean Cocteau was still making movies in the 50s, but by 1960 he made his last film. We were losing some of the greats, so the French New Wave films were different. They were shot on location instead of sound stages. There was a lot of experimentation going on with long takes and new editing techniques, an almost documentary style of filmmaking. Narratives about social movements and the general feeling of France in the 50s and 60s, these were the hallmarks of the French New Wave. The critics in question all worked for Cahiers du Cinéma, François Truffaut, Jean-Luc, Eric Rohmer, Claude Chabrol, and Jacques Rivette. They learned how to make and finance their movies independently, and they were off. To contextualize this for modern audiences, it would be like if today the staff of IndieWire.com said, we're going to make our own movies and revolutionize American cinema and change the landscape forever. Truffaut was the director behind The 400 Blows. You know those movies that romanticize the past, not just the past, but childhood, and keep it firmly in the realm of blissful nostalgia? The 400 Blows is the opposite of that. It looks back at childhood and all the trappings of it without the goggles on. It's a great movie, and it may even be his best, and it was also his first feature film. Like, there were no baby steps. He could just fly right away. American audiences may be more familiar with Truffaut as the director of the film adaptation of Fahrenheit 451. And you know what? I like it. I like that movie. It's not his greatest film, but some aspects of the novel won't work with the limited special effects and budget Truffaut had at his disposal in 1966. So let's talk about Godard. Le Mépris, or Contempt, is my favorite French New Wave film. It's this satirical look at the film industry in 1963. You can almost tell that this was directed by a film critic. There's a lot of discussion about poetry and ancient literature in the film, and if you're into that, then this is just candy. It's wonderful. Visually, it's gorgeous as well. If Contempt is my favorite French New Wave film, then ALPHAVILLE is not even number 2, but more like 1A. It's this seamless blend of science fiction and film noir decades before Blade Runner. It's very tense. The computer voice is just deeply uncomfortable, but in a good way. Eric Rohmer. Okay, I'll be perfectly honest. I have seen exactly one film by Rohmer, and it was enough to make me steer clear of the rest of his filmography. La Collectionneuse. It's basically heresy to cast aspersions on his 6 Moral Tales films, but you know what? It's like watching grass grow or paint dry. I'm sorry, don't hate me, France. If you want a meditative film, try Claude Chabrol's Le Beau Serge, or Handsome Serge. It's about coming home to see that everything has changed. And in that regard, it's very relatable, very universal. Paris Belongs to Us by Jacques Rivette. Beautiful, just somber, engrossing film. Everything is intriguing and contemplative. Look, I could just list French films all day, but moving on. The term New Wave was used to describe these directors I just mentioned, but they didn't all get together in a dark room and say, hey fellas, we're going to start a new movie gang. We're going to be called the New Wave. No, it's just, they just had a common background and occupation and workplace, and they had some ideas for what they wanted French films to be. And people called this the French New Wave. But that actually leads me to my next point. What do we consider a French New Wave film? Is it just a blanket term to describe anything made in France in the late 50s and 60s? Or is it exclusively confined to those filmmakers who worked for the magazine? What about the left bank? Some people consider this group to be part of the French New Wave and some don't. I kind of don't, because they seem to be their own thing, their own group with their own ideas. They were more intensely political and obviously to the left. Agnes Varda, who is in that particular designation, that particular group, is actually one of my favorite filmmakers of all time. Do we even have those anymore, filmmaker groups? Like in America, the USC School of Cinematic Arts birthed the Dirty Dozen, like a bunch of film students who knew each other and worked together after graduation, like Robert Zemeckis and George Lucas and John Milius and so forth. But I'm getting away from myself. The point is that the French New Wave helped revolutionize film, but not just in that country, really helped influence film all over the world.